This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so everybody on their best behavior, we're being recorded now. Okay, so the Ramchal goes through how everything that takes place in this physical world is as a result of this trigger reaction working its way down links of the chain from spiritual realms into our physical world. All right, this is something that came up recently when we were discussing the holidays. In fact, that Pesach, well, we follow a lunar calendar, but we have to adjust our lunar calendar to the solar seasons, whereas Islam follows a lunar calendar without any adjustments, and a lunar calendar is 11 days shorter than a solar year, 354 as opposed to 365. So we have to adjust our calendar by adding an extra month, an Adar Bet, the second month of Adar, 7 out of every 19 years, in order to stay in sync with the solar calendar. Why? Because we view what's happening in the physical world as a glimmer, as a manifestation, as a reflection of what's happening in the spiritual world. So, for example, Pesach, which is a time of exodus, a time of renewal, a time of rebirth, that has to take place during springtime. Why? Not that we're aligned to springtime, but we want to tap into that spiritual potential of rebirth. And that happens in the springtime. The springtime is a reflection of that potential, that spiritual potential that is available. So everything in the physical world works its way down from its roots in the spiritual realm. And in this chapter, we're going to discuss the idea of, I think the way the Sefaria actually refers to it as witchcraft or sorcery, and the idea there is as follows, as he explains it. We'll soon see. There are these spiritual forces in the world, and we are meant to tap into the positive physical, spiritual sources. But if there is evil in the world, then there also is these spiritual roots of the evil. At the highest level, we discussed earlier that evil does not come from God, but when God moves away, so to speak, when there is that hester panim, that hiding of his face, there is that lacking of his light, then what fills that can be Ra. But there are those who might tap into these forces and can sometimes, not in our world, and don't try this at home, but at times of greater spiritual connection, there were those who were able, there is the possibility, there is the method of tapping into that. It's very interesting that the famous abracadabra, it might just be a coincidence, but the Hebrew, the Aramaic is abra kidabra. Abra means I will create, ki, like, dabra, like I will speak. So the abracadabra is I will create as I will speak. Maybe it means something else in another language also, but it certainly means that in Hebrew Aramaic. So there are these, so we're discussing now, until this point, we're discussing tapping into the Kedusha, the holiness. And then the next chapter after this, we're in part 3, chapter 2. The next chapter after this, the next parak, is going to go into Nevuah, into Ruach HaKodesh and Nevuah, right? Divine inspiration and prophecy. But this chapter is going to speak about the entire structure that allows for Nevuah, and that same structure that allows for Nevuah prophecy. There's always this idea of Zeh L'umat Zeh. There is this balance between the positive and the negative. That's how we always have our free will. And therefore, this will be connecting to these other sources. So let us begin with Aleph, paragraph 1. Kfar Be'arnu, we've already explained the Chalakim Shekadmu in the previous parts, chapters. Shetchilat Kol HaNivraim, the very source of all which has been created, hu klal kochot nivdalim, come from these spiritual sources, spiritual roots, transcendental forces, whatever you want to call them. Anything that exists in the physical world has this spiritual root underpinning from which it is drawing its existence. Mesudarim, and they are all arranged, organized, b'seder chachma, with this wisdom, b'machlakot yiduot, according to these different levels and different sections. Umehem mishtal shalim b'hadraga hagashmiyin leminehem, and from them it works down in this hadraga, right? In modern Hebrew, madregot are steps. A madrega is a level, a spiritual level, a high madrega. It works down in madregot to the gashmiim, to the physical beings, leminehem, each one according to who and what they are. Od Be'arna, we also explained, Inyan Kochot Hara, there are these forces of Ra, of evil. Shemehem Mishtal Shalim Haraot Kulam Begashmiyim, that from them, Ra, evil, works its way down into this world, either in potential of choices that we can make, which will be ill-advised choices, or when there are tragedies that strike the world. Od Bayarnu, we also explained, she'ikar mitata mitziyut hanivra huma mashe b'sharashim hanivdalim. The real essence, the real existence, the real essence of the existence of anything that exists down here in this world is actually that which is found up in its spiritual roots. Umashe b'gashmiyim, that which works its way down into the physical, hu hemshech levad, it's simply an extension from that which is rooted and based up above. V'ulam sham nisdar litpashet masha yara'oi litpashet, and from there it will extend, it will work its way down, that which is meant to work its way down, lefi amitat mitzuyut hanimtzeim v'inyanim, that which is aligned with what the essence is above, that is how it will be reflected down here. That which is supposed to be up in the roots, and that which is meant to work its way down, literally anafim means the branches. And the divine wisdom arranged that this works its way down. And it copies or transfers that whatever issue it is from level to level until it works its way down into this physical world. So on everything, every physical thing has its chain of roots, going higher and higher, until we reach the primary forces, spiritual forces. The kol echad omeid v'mamado, and each one stands in its place, umitkayem v'madrigato gvulav, and stays within its boundaries of what it's supposed to do, kamoshid biolo habori parach shemo ve'einu yotzmem, as God established for it, and it stays contained within those bounds. V'asharashim kulam mashpin lanfehem, and the normal process is it works its way down, not going out of their natural boundaries. And the world goes on and exists and functions in its teva, in its natural manner. Right? I think Rav Dessler once pointed out very beautifully that nature is nothing but the term for miracles that we've grown accustomed to. That's what nature is, right? Food falls down from the heavens, manna from the sky, meatballs in the sky. We say, wow, it's a miracle. It grows out from the earth. An incredibly tasty, sweet watermelon grows out from a single seed into this massive sweet fruit from the earth and a seed. That we say is natural. right? But no one is any more miraculous than the other when we think about it. One is what we've grown accustomed to, and the other is that which we don't expect. Now, an important point just on this that we see right away is a point where Judaism and Christianity differ. And there are many, 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 many points. But one fundamental area is that Christianity views the world as a battle between God and Satan, between good and evil. Whereas Judaism says, Shema Yisroel Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. There is one God, there is one power. And Ra, evil, is a servant of Hashem that is there in order to create, as he discussed in the earlier chapters, to create an environment in this world where we have choices to make. If there is no Ra, there are no choices to make, and we become robot-like, we become angel-like in just going for good without making any decisions, without overcoming any temptations, without thereby any self-developments and self-growth, which, as he explained in the earlier chapters, the whole purpose of this world is to give us a venue where we make decisions, we choose, and thereby become more godlike, and thereby we can connect to God. So Ra is a function of a necessary component in this world, but it's meant to be overcome and vanquished. That is the purpose that it serves. Like when Yaakov fought with the angel and won, the angel represented that Yetzer Hara, and Uzi, just give me a second, a lot of bounce back, Uzi. Sorry. That angel represented that Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and its job was to push Yaakov until Yaakov overcame it, and that was its role. Its role is to fight, 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 and then to throw in the towel, and we walk away strengthened and invigorated and more godlike and closer to Hashem as a result of that. But everything has its roots up above, and with God at the apex. Yes, Uzi, you wanted to say something before?
Yeah. The feedback you're getting is from my fan over here. It's very hot outside, so my fan is on. I just turned it off, so there shouldn't be feedback now. I was just going to make a comment that we should thank Eve for all this, because originally, we were not supposed to eat from the tree that allows us to distinguish between good and evil, meaning we didn't even understand what good and evil is. So we have to thank Eve for that.
Yes. According to however we try to understand these deep Kabbalistic concepts, Adam and Chava had their choice. Their choice was to not eat from the Eitz Hadat and to eat from everything else, and to appreciate that they're living in God's world, in God's garden, and it's His world, and we are guests here. That was their nisayon, that was their challenge. And had they overcome that, then mankind would have reached this apex, and that's what would have been. But instead, the challenge has been meted out to all of their descendants, namely us, throughout all the generations, each of us to do our part in that struggle to overcome temptation and to overcome Ra. Va'amnam. So paragraph 2. Gazra Chacham El Yonah she'od lekochan hapoalim begashmim mitziyut pu'ala shelo keseder hishtalshalut. God also established that these spiritual forces can act upon the physical world in a different way. Shelo keseder hishtalshalut. There is like a shortcut. Instead of going through all of the normal steps, we can do a short end run around. That they themselves can directly affect events in this world, in this physical world, the physical beings. Things that are aligned with who and what these forces are. Right? And this is something that will go beyond the normal laws of nature. There are these aberrations, these blips in the matrix, so to speak, where what's happening is not through the normal sequence, and which is what we call teva, nature, and rather something will happen on beyond the norm. V'nei nitan la'adam yicholet sheyishtamesh min hanimtzaot al haderech hazeh. Mankind has the ability to utilize, to manipulate things in such a manner. The same way that we have the power to act on things in a natural way, we also have the ability to connect to and to thereby manipulate things on this beyond natural plane. She'ein hashtamesh TV muchlat kir tzono. Right? Now, there are limitations over here. Just like within the natural world, there are limitations to what I can and can't do. So too, there are these limitations, right, in terms of how I can affect beyond my abracadabra. It can only be done in certain pathways, within certain parameters. Right? I can't cut through something hard unless I've got a sharp knife. Those are the limitations that I have in the physical world. And I can't get higher than maybe a foot and a half off the ground unless I've got some sort of a ladder or a step stool. My jump will only take me that far. Right? I can only squeeze something that is davar rach, something that is soft. So too, if one tries to enter into this realm, it could only be done in certain clear manners, according to known parameters to those who are involved in these things. Right? According to what God saw as being fitting. So this is very interesting, right? You know, he will say, Rabbi, do you believe in black magic? Right? So my typical response is, I don't believe anybody today can actually access these forces, but I do believe that we are physical beings that are part of this incredibly integrated, connected spiritual network. That's what we are. That's who we are. Right? When by creation, when it says that Rashi brings a famous medrash that by the time's creation for man, we had a balance between the heavenly and the earthly, the heavenly and the earthly, heavenly, earthly. Each day of creation, heavenly, earthly, earthly. What's going to be with creation of man? If God will make us earthly, then we're out of balance on the earth side. If God will make us heavenly, we're out of balance on the heavenly side. So what did God do? He created mankind who has a physical body and a spiritual soul. And that way he maintained the balance. And at first glance, there doesn't seem to be an answer. You've taken a spiritual soul and you've imprisoned it in a physical body, in a physical world with physical needs. That's not a balance. But Nefesh HaChaim, others explain that we are misunderstanding what a human being is. A human being, the lowest part of the soul is inside of us. But a human being stretches, literally traverses from earth up to the heavens. The lowest part of the soul we discussed earlier is within us, but there are other levels of the soul that connect and connect and connect and connect. So therefore we are, I like to envision it, if you remember when the Twin Towers were destroyed. So as a memorial afterwards, they had these incredible spotlights in the place where the towers stood, shooting up into the sky, up into the heavens. And to me, that's how I envision. That's what a human being is. We're down here, but the spotlight, the soul shoots up. So we are connected in an incredibly spiritual way. And there are many people who have this sense of spirituality, to know things and to sense things that go beyond just their physical self. I just heard an incredible story that was told to the person who told the story. The person told the story heard it from the person himself that happened to. And this was either in the 1980s or 1990s. There was a Jew from Belgium who came visiting the States. He was a Hasidic Jew, not of Lubavitch Hasidim, but he was in New York and he wanted to go hear the Lubavitcher Rebbe give one of his talks. It was Purim night. The Lubavitcher Rebbe would speak till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So he went to hear this talk. Afterwards, what he was accustomed to doing is you go give shalom. You go give a shalom aleichem, to whichever Rebbe it was that you were at. So he went to give a shalom to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It was right 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. His gabayim, his attendants, started to push him away, saying, no, not now, not now. The Rebbe needs to go rest. The Rebbe stopped, looked at him, put out his hand, held his hand, and continued walking while holding his hand. The Rebbe went into his office and brought him into his office and closed the door. And he told him, Zetz Arayin, sit down. He went over to a cabinet where he had all these thousands of letters. He pulls out a letter and says, read this letter. This person starts to read a letter. The letter was written by a woman in her mid-30s, and she was writing to Lubavitcher Rebbe as follows. I've been diagnosed with a very late stage of cancer, and the doctors say that I have virtually no chance to survive this. I'm at peace. Whatever Hashem wants to do, I'm at peace with that. But I have 12 children. The oldest is 14. And I'm so concerned what's going to be with my kinderlach, with my children. So I'm asking you, Rebbe, please have my children in mind, daven for them, that they should grow up to be good people, erlicha yidden. They should grow up to be good, fine Jews. This person's reading this letter, and then he reads the signature on the bottom. That was his mother. He was the 12-year-old of the second to oldest. This was a letter from his mother that he never knew of. And he just started weeping. And when he composed himself, he asked the Rebbe, can I have this letter? And the Rebbe said, I'm sorry, I apologize, I can't give you this letter. I read this letter every year right before I go to say Kol Nidre. I read this letter every year. I can't give it away. So there's a person, obviously a very holy person, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who this person walks in, a stranger. He's never seen him in his life. And he sensed, this is one of the children that I've been davening for. And this person comes over, he takes him by the arm. He didn't ask his name, didn't say, Avu kumta yid, where are you coming from? Nothing. He just sensed, this is the person, this is one of the children that I've been davening for. And he had him read that letter. So, do I believe in black magic? I believe that we are physical people who are very embedded in a very spiritual world that is not perceivable to our 5 bodily senses, but is very much embedded in the spiritual world. And there are those who can connect to that which is beyond our physical world that we can physically sense. And there is that availability for those who know how to do it. And there are ways that we are meant to connect. And there are ways that we are not meant to, and actually prohibited from connecting in those ways. So do I believe in black magic? I don't believe that anyone today can do it. And any great magician who does something that is, wow, my first thought is, how did he do it? That's my only thought. How did he do it? Not, wow, he has powers. But based on the structure that I believe exists, that we are taught exists in the world, yes, there are these different spiritual forces all around us, some positive, some negative, and a person can plug into them. It's possible within the boundaries that are set. Gimel, paragraph 3. Umichlala inyan hazeh od. Kine kvar b'yanu, we've explained, hayota adam harkava shoshnei avachim, being that a human being is a composite. Every human being is actually two beings. We discussed this earlier, whereas an animal has a living spirit, and that's what gives it its life, that's what animates it. A human being has a living spirit, and in addition to that, has a neshama elyona, has a spiritual being that partners together. And once the living spirit leaves that body and the body dies, then that neshama, which is a carbon copy of our physical self, of who we are, the way we look, the way we think, all of our feelings, that is us, that then separates. So being that a human being is this harkava, is this composite of these two opposites, guf uneshama, the physical body and the spiritual soul, and the soul, the neshama, is tied to this body, which gives these limitations in the matter that it's tied, according to the degree that God has specified. And just like a person is bound in his physicality by the laws, so to speak, of the body and of physicality, nishmato kshura ba'avotot elot susemehem, our souls are also bound to a certain degree by these avotot, by these ropes, so to speak, by these boundaries, that we can't go beyond that. V'ulam, however, Ratza Derech Adam Baruch Hu, God wanted, Shia Derech L'Adam, that humankind has a means, has a way, Shiyuchal Lihitpateach B'miktzat, that one can free oneself to a certain degree, Mikushrei Hagufanit Hazeh V'Shashlotav, from the chains, from the boundaries of this physicality, V'Yagiu Inyanim Shelo K'mishvat Gufaniyot, and he can gain things that go beyond our physicality, El K'mishpat Ruchaniyut, rather that allows us to enter into the realm of the spiritual realm. Ba'al Yidei Zeh, Tagiu Lo Haskala V'Hasaga V'Ruchaniyim V'Inyaneihem, and through that a person can gain understanding from connections to the spirituality, which cannot happen through simply a physical manner, the physical limitations we discussed in a previous chapter, the idea of dreams. And dreams, he says, is mostly a tremendous confused mix of different thoughts that we're having, things that we're concerned about, things that we're hoping for, and it all gets mixed in. And very often when I wake up, oh, that was such a funny dream, and I love piecing together. I was thinking about that, I was worried about that, I was happy about that, and it came together in such a bizarre manner. But he says there are certain times that a person has a dream of something that actually happened elsewhere, or that actually will happen. And when it happens, they say, oh my gosh, I had that. I saw that already. And how does that happen? And he explained before that when a person sleeps and parts of the soul literally leave the body, they're able to then associate in the spiritual realm. And in the spiritual realm, they're not bound by time. They're not bound by space as we are in our physical realm. And therefore, they're able to access information. And at times, that comes back and can come into our consciousness once we reawaken, and that modani shechazarta binishmati, that soul has come back into me. V'chein taleh biyado yoter hamadat hamitziyut kulam ala matzav hatov hanaot bahem. And mankind, by accessing this area, those who can, and when accessing it in a proper manner, then taleh biyado yoter. As a result of this person, the whole world around him will become elevated. Ala matzav hatov hanot bahem, to a higher level. Lamala ulamata, and this can have an effect down below and above, down below by the physical world and up above in the spiritual realm. V'hinei, heichina hachachma yonah, this divine wisdom established. Shimatzei bitul gvulim migvulei teva chomer v'olam hazeh, hamavdilim umarchikim et adam min ha'imsim ruchanim v'inyaneihem. That there are ways that we can break through those boundaries, those limitations, those barriers that exist between us and the physical realm and the spiritual realm. V'yutar ha'adam mikishureim, and man can loose those bounds, untie those knots. V'yatsev al matzav mu'uleh, and can thereby arise to a heightened level mimatzav ha'gashmi, from our regular physical state. Until a person will have a connection with the spiritual realm. Even while he's still in this world, in his physical, limiting body. Right? There are many such stories about different tzaddikim, like I told you about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. There are times that people have this sense that goes beyond any physical knowledge that one can have. The author of Shulchan Aruch, the author of Rav Yosef Karo, who is the author of the Code of Jewish Law, whenever a person learns halacha, they're teaching the book of Rav Yosef Karo with the gloss, the added notes of Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah. And that's how we have our Sephardic customs, our Ashkenazic customs, and all the common ground. But it is documented that Rav Yosef Karo had a Magid. When he was writing the Shulchan Aruch, there was a Magid. Now, we hear the word a Magid, we think of, a rabbi who goes around and gives very, very inspiring talks. But the Magid over there was a malach, no other word for it, who would learn with him and teach him certain things and guide him in certain ways. There are those who are able to have this connection with the spiritual world, odenu, even while they are still in this world, begufo achashoch, in their spiritually body. Yes, Uzi.
I was just going to say that we hear so many stories about mothers who suddenly get a bad feeling as to something that terrible happened to one of their sons or their children. There are so many stories about that, and I think this is their connection to the spiritual world, and that's how I understand it, because it's not logical, but they have that sense that something wrong happened. So many times you hear something like that.
Yeah. Yes, I agree 100%. You hear stories about a woman who wakes up in the middle of the night, all nervous in Israel, and just takes Tehillim, starts saying Tehillim. And in the morning, her son calls her and tells her, "Oh, I was in Gaza, wherever I was, and we had this whole battle, and things were really, really on the edge." And that's at the time the mother woke up and was saying to him, yeah, I agree 100%. And like my sense is there's no way to physically, the child is miles away. There is no physical bond, but there is a spiritual bond. We are much more than just simply physical beings who exist and do our things over here. Yeah, I think that's an excellent example, Uzi, of not just tzaddikim or great tzaddikim, but but even more common people. That we all have these connections. I agree.
It is
Vu'ulam.
worth wait, I was just going to say that it's worth saying that it's only mothers, not fathers.
I would tend to agree that the mothers have a greater connection. Yeah, that's the bracha that the women say, Shasani Kirtsono, that they are more inherently aligned with the will of God, with the Ratzon Hashem, with the whole spiritual realm. They need less reminders than the men who need to be hit over our heads with a 2x4 every once in a while in order to keep up. V'ulam lo kol gvulot hateva hu chak sheyuvtulo. However, it's not all the natural boundaries that can be suspended. Elaktsat mehem. God allows for a partial suspension. Otam, those sherata chachmal yonah heyoton naot le kavanah klal, those that God saw as being fitting for the overall benefit and the uplifting of this world. As we wrote in the first chelek, in that first chapter. V'gam eila, and even those which can be suspended, b'tnaim mishoarim, it's with very, very finely measured conditions. Udrachim yiduim, certain paths. B'tachlit hadikduk, it's got to be done in a very, very precise manner. V'ulam, hitkina chachmatoi baruch shmo emtsaim la'adam shebehem yuchal la'asig hatachlit hazeh im yirtzeh shishtadeh bam. But God arranged that there are certain methods, there are certain mediums through which a person can do this, that they can achieve this tachlit if they want and if they work on it. Dahainu, which means bitul gvulei hateva eila mimenu, going beyond these boundaries of the physical, to place and to put oneself in this state that we mentioned. And all of this is dependent upon what I will now explain. No. Kinenit ba'er, it's been clear, it's been explained. Shikiyim kolam mitziyut kulam b'chalam ufatayim eina el Adon Baruch Hu. The existence of anything and everything is dependent only on Ha'adon Baruch Hu, only on God. V'nim shekol nimtzot, all that exists, this sidreim and this whole, all these processes of step down that we've discussed, beimar shekol, you know, whether in the transcendental, lofty spiritual forces, or in those spiritual creations that work on the way down, whether it's us at the bottom of the rope, it's only because it's all dependent on Him, it's all hinging on God. All existence is only hinging on God. Hu nimtza mitgaleh el kol nimtzaav. So God is nimtza, found, and reveals Himself to all that exists, umashpia bam, and influences them, and sends down what they need, according to what they need for their existence. And all of these influences are many and varied according to the Riva Makablim Shinuyam, according to each recipient who is different, with different needs. And it's only through these hashpa, this influences, this flow of energy, perhaps we can call it, that comes from God. Upon that is dependent anything that exists. Each one as it exists in its own manner. And from all of this work down mechanism, all that results comes about. According to God's arrangement. These spiritual beings, angels, receive their light from God, and then they pass it down to those beneath them. Those will pass down to the next level until the end of this entire hishtal shalut, right? Shalshelet, right? This whole work down mechanism. The Anam Rotza Hashem Yitbarach. We'll make this last paragraphs and go on for a little while. Liot Nikra B'Shem. God wanted to be called by a name. This is interesting. We have many names for God, but almost all the names of God are borrowed names. Aleph Daled Nun Yud comes from Adon, master. So we have masters down here in this world, and then God is the real master. We have Rachaman, compassion. This person is compassion, but God is the real Rachaman. So we take terms that we use for other things, people, and we also apply that to God. But God also wanted to have a name that's not a borrowed term, a name that is simply God's name. So that the creations can be uplifted by this and can call out. Lahazkiro, to mention it. Ulitkarevelav, to draw close to him. God designated his honor on the Shem HaMiyuchad. That's the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei name that we don't pronounce. V'amar alav, and he says that Zeshmi L'olam. This is my name, L'olam, forever. And the Gemara says, yes, but also Ayin Lamed Mem La'alein, to cover over. And we don't use that name. The Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, when he's giving his bracha to the entire nation on Yom Kippur, that's when he would use that name. And that is the name that is about God himself. And it's fascinating. I've showed this before. The intent when we say Yud Kei, when it's written Yud Kei Vav Kei, we never say it. But we're supposed to be thinking Haya, Hoveh, V'yiyeh. God was, God is, and God will be. But it's not that God was yesterday, God is today, and God will be tomorrow. God is, was, is, will be. Meaning, God is beyond, it's a simultaneous was, is, will be, because he's not bound by the realm of time. And fascinatingly, if you take the word Haya, write it down, Hey, Yud, Hey, and circumscribe on top of that, Hoveh, Haya was, Hoveh is, Hey, Vav, Hey. Write that on top of the Hey, Yud, Hey. And then write Yihiyeh, Yud, Hey, Yud, Hey. So when you have all three of them piled one on top of the other, you have Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. You have that ineffable name of God. Because it's a simultaneous Haya, Hoveh, V'yiyah. That is the one name of God, that's a name of God that's not borrowed, and that describes that which is uniquely godlike. And therefore, through the mentioning of these different names, one can go beyond the physical world. If you remember when Moshe had smote the Egyptian who was mercilessly beaten to death that Jewish worker, and then what happens afterwards? He encounters Datan and Aviram as they are fighting, and he says to them, he says to them, one second, why are you fighting? And they say, Halahageni ata omer, are you going to kill us? Ata omer, right, with the words that you are going to say. One second, there it is. Right, who appointed you as a minister over us? This is in Shemot, Perek Bet, Pasuk Yudalid. Har lahageni ata omer. Are you going to say to kill me the same way that you killed that Mitzri? And Rashi brings Mikanu lemedim shahargu b'shem hamufurash. How did Moshe kill that Mitzri? With the Shem hamufurash, using God's names. How Moshe knew one of God's names at that point when he was still in the house of Paro? This is before the burning bush, before he fled, before everything. I don't know. But Rashi says that his killing of the Mitzri was with the Shema Mefurash, that by citing a name of God in an appropriate fashion, one can go beyond the physical confines of what normally bounds us and could break out into a different realm. Okay, we'll stop over here. We'll have to pick up. I will not be here next Monday. I apologize. But Bez Hashem will pick up in 2 weeks' time on Monday. Bez Hashem. Morris and Cheryl, wonderful having you with us.
It is amazing to see Cheryl.
Susie, Robin, Galit. Galit Mazel Tov, you have a Brit this week, right, in Israel? Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Lots of nachat from the family. Okay.
Thank you.
All
Good
right.
night, everybody.
Yishar Koch, Rabbi.
Good night. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
Okay. Oh, she's off. Thank you.